Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Educated Collins Marvel Snap channel. How you doing? Today, we're going to be talking about what kind of Marvel Snapper are you? So this is going to be a pros and cons discussion about the different type of snappers. Obviously, snapping is a skill set and there's different ways to utilize it. So we're just going to be talking about some of the things you may be doing without really thinking about it and some of the pros and cons associated with that mentality. Let's begin. So first of all, we have the turn 1 Risktaker. So this is a person that just snaps turn 1 willy-nilly, doesn't really care what the locations are. We always snap turn 1. There are some pros to this. You can get free queues. People will leave turn 1, even if they're a defensive player or so. This can be actually a good strategy if your deck tends to win. So if you have a very strong deck, your deck generally wins the game, then snapping turn 1 can always make it a 2-game minimum investment. So that can be pretty good. And generally it makes the climb faster if you are using this strategy and using it well, right? You're going to be getting more cubes than someone who doesn't snap turn 1. So this can be good. There are some cons. You just don't have enough information to make smart snaps. So you could definitely just get screwed by the location, screwed by opponents having very strong plays, very strong draws, counters to your deck, blah, blah, blah. There's huge variance in the results. So since you're always snapping turn 1, the cube gain is going to be very extreme. And you could just have like tons of good games, or you could have tons of bad games. And that can feel pretty disparaging if like one day you go up 5, the next day you go down to 5, right? That can be pretty bad. So gotta be careful with that. And then last thing is the opponents can always play till turn 6 if they decide to stay, right? So one thing about snapping is if you snap in the right scenarios, you can force your opponent to leave. Snapping turn 1, a lot of people will stay past that turn 1 snap, but then they always get to play the game out all the way to turn 6 before they decide whether to leave or not, right? So you don't put themselves in awkward, like even if you put themselves in awkward positions in the mid game, they can still just stay because there's no downside. You're not putting that extra snap pressure on them. So there is that risk of snapping turn 1. Turn 2, risk takers. So this one is very similar to turn 1, but instead of snapping turn 1, you snap turn 2. This one, you have a little bit more information to make smarter decisions. So it's not fully random turn when I snap. Here, turn 2. Okay, is it actually looking good for me? All right, I'll snap. So here you don't always snap, but you still don't have full information. And this snap is still usually early enough to keep opponents in the game. People don't really leave fully turn 1, turn 2 unless something really weird happens. So you have more information to make your decisions, and people aren't really going to leave all that often. However, you can still get screwed by a third location. You haven't seen it yet. And then you also probably don't have enough information to know the enemy composition. So it's still pretty risky. It's definitely less risky than turn 1, but it's something you have to be aware of. Next up, we have the 3 location analyzer, right? So this is a person that snaps after all of the 3 locations are revealed. So this one is nice because you have a good chunk of information. You can bait powerful turn 3s by snapping turn 3. So people might just think, oh, he has a Zabu, let me leave. And then also, you also have a good grasp of the game state. Usually by this time, you kind of know, you can kind of start telling what your opponent's compositions are running. You kind of see what your hand looks like. So it's a pretty safe and pretty effective turn to snap, I would say. A lot of times, there's a good chance you have all the necessary information to really have good confidence on whether you're favored in the match or not. Problem with this is your opponent has all these same advantages, right? There's no advantage to snapping turn 3. intrinsically, because your opponent also knows the locations. Your opponent can also guess your composition. Your opponent can also bait. So it's just a good time to snap, but it doesn't really give you any advantages in your snapping style. Next up, we have the Zabu Snappers. So I may have contributed to this situation. But yeah, these are the people that basically just snap into Zabu if they draw the Zabu. Nice about it, it's simple and clean. You can bait free wins because turn 3 he snapped, he's got Zabu. Turn 2 he snapped, maybe he's got Zabu. And then you also always have a decent game since you're gonna have Zabu. The game, it's hard to have bad games if you have your king piece. So it's a pretty safe snap. The cons is it's very telegraphed a lot of times in the Zabu meta, like he snapped turn 3, he's got Zabu. And if your opponent is running a heavy counter deck, a heavy Zabu counter deck, Enchantress, Sandman, Rogue, whatever, they can counter snap into you, or they can do their counter play turn 6, and it's very likely you're losing 4 or 8 cubes. So you do have to be careful about this. This is kind of why sometimes I'll hear people say, "Oh, I lost 10 ranks." It's because they've been snapping willy-nilly because they had a Zabu, and like people are just like adjusting to the meta. So you do have to be careful, but it is a viable game strategy. Next up, we have the I drew my king or queen piece snappers. So usually these are the people that will draw their most important card. Sometimes it's Silver Surfer, sometimes it's Galactus or whatever, and then they'll snap, right? So the nice thing about this is you have your key piece, so you can snap with confidence. And sometimes the snap isn't always telegraphed because I drew a card, so I snapped. It's not because of the board state that you're snapping, so it's hard to read, or it's harder to read. And also the strategy is simple, so you can focus on other parts of the game. If you draw your good card, snap. Like, very simple strategy, so you can focus on the game and not the snapping metagame. Cons: sometimes you can be overconfident. Just because you draw your good card doesn't mean you're gonna win. So it's not a guaranteed win. It's just something that gives you confidence in snapping. And then you're likely also not taking advantage of other good snapping situations, since if you draw your card turn 6, well, you're not really snapping then. And if the board state looks good for you and you don't need your key piece, well, you're not taking advantage of it. So there's a very high likelihood you're not really squeezing as much cubes as possible. Now we have the trap card snapper. So this is a player that snaps if they have like the Shang-Chi, like, I've got Shang-Chi here. I play my trap card, or I've got the Enchantress, that kind of thing. They have the exact counter to what your deck's trying to run. So nice thing is you usually win, right? And it's very likely you get large cube returns. And it's a pretty safe snapping style. Like, I counter your deck, like I snap. It's a pretty safe snap. Problem is you aren't really, your deck isn't dictating the snapping, so you can go multiple games without snapping. If you have the counter pieces but no one's playing it, well, you're not going to step into that. And also sometimes this snapping style can telegraph your plays. So sometimes I'll play a key card that I know has weaknesses. The opponent will snap into it. And because they snapped, I'm like, okay, they probably have the counter, so let me play around that in the best way I can. So this style of snapping can tell your opponent information and telegraph your strategy. And you're also not taking full advantage of the situation, right? Once again, with the king, queen snapping, you're not really snapping in other advantageous positions. So you have to be a little bit more aware. Next up, we have the always win snapper. This person is already ahead. He's already destroying me. Maybe I'm projecting. And he just snaps. And I'm like, you've won already. Why are you snapping? You're just forcing the player to leave. It's a little too cocky, a little too like smug for me. But yeah, you're usually very ahead when you snap. Your game plan is clear and clean, and you have to force your enemy to admit defeat. So you're snapping even though you know you're ahead, but the opponent has to be like, okay, fine, like I guess you won, like whatever. So it's sometimes, it's sometimes painful for the enemy, and then fun for you. Some of the cons is sometimes it's better to not snap in those positions because if you snap, you're basically telling them you won. Where if you don't snap, they have to come to the conclusion that you won. So it gives them one more um, thought process or plan of action that they have to take before the game ends. Where if you snap, you're like, well, I got infinite for free. Like you have to leave. Where if you don't snap, they're like, I guess he wins with infinite here, and then he leaves. So that's kind of an issue, right? Not snapping in these positions might be better, and then you also don't allow RNG to give you cube advantages because so basically you're snapping after the RNG has been decided, right, in your favor. Like X Mansion comes out and then boom, you got Infinite, they got like Modark or something, right? Uh, so uh, that's when you snap. Like you could snap before the X Mansion comes out if you want to play a little bit risky, and you're not doing that with this type of snapping style. And it's also the personal opinion, kind of obnoxious. You've won, like you don't have to lay it on thick there. So definitely don't like these type of players, but it is a strategy that people do utilize. All right. Next up, we have the never snap snappers. So these people don't snap. Uh, benefits: you don't lose that many cubes. You can fully focus solely on the game, and it's usually a good strategy if you're trying something new, right? If you're trying new deck ideas, new builds, right? You don't always know what counters your deck if you're trying something new, so it's kind of good to not snap and just like learn the deck, and then gain more confidence and then snap. Now, obviously, some of the cons is your cube gain is low since you're not snapping, and you're never pressing your position. Even though you have a good position, you're likely to win. You're not snapping, and then you always have to play out game. So sometimes with snapping, you can like, okay, I win, I snap, you leave. If you don't snap, people always get the chance to play till turn 6. So you're playing more longer games basically because you're never snapping. All right, now next up we have the lockdown snappers. So these are the people that will, double Spider-Man you snap or Professor X lockdown you snap, that kind of strategy. So obviously it's a very strong position to snap in. If they snap into double Spider-Man, well, you can't play into 2 lanes. Sometimes all 3 of them. So you can pretty much guarantee cube gains because they have to leave. There's nothing they could do, so they have to leave. Some of the cons is you're rarely getting more than 2 cubes at a time with this strategy because you lock down the locations while they're leaving, right? They're never gonna play it out for the max cubes, and it's extremely annoying. So you can definitely get on the bad side of players, especially at high elo if you're fighting the same opponents, right? You can just be like, this guy. Like, and I don't think you want to be creating that mindset. Like someone fights you and they're like, this guy again. Like you don't want that. You want people to like enjoy your games, have good matches. Do the fist bump at the end, that kind of thing. So can be a con. And then also, if you mess up with this, right, you instantly lose, right? So, like, let's say you double Spider-Man and they like arrow both into a lane, and now they win that lane, and now you're behind, and it's like, or let's say like they play Vision, or you double Spider-Man, but then they Doctor Doom, blah blah blah, and they win anyways, right? Um, can be very horrible and can lead to instant retreating on your part. So there are some downsides to this strategy. Next up, we have the reach snapper. So this is kind of like the opposite of the lockdown snappers. These people snap because they can reach into hard to get locations. So this kind of snapper can like counter the lockdown snapper, and it's also good into like flood locations, right? If the person's flood location, but you have like a vision, well, you snap with the vision, like, oh, now I lost it, or you have Doctor Doom into like that one location that people can't play cards into, right? There's a ton of locations like that actually. So um, that kind of snapper gets huge cube gains because you think they can't get into that lane, but they can, right? And you snap with confidence, they counter snap you with confidence, and you're like, that's weird, right? And especially if they do it, they snap strategically, they can get 4 cubes, 8 cubes off of you. And then this is a type of snapping style that catches people off guard because they have to be aware that, oh, maybe they can get into this lane. Oh, maybe they can win this location. Because sometimes you're like, well, I always win this, storm location. And oh, turn 5 Doombot. Oh, now I actually lost. So you can definitely catch people off guard. Some of the cons is your opponent could also have the same reach cards, right? So you're like, I snap into vision, and then they also play vision. Well, it's like, well, whoops, now I've lost, and things like that. And unfortunately, the snap is not really determined by your cards. It's usually determined by what your opponent's done or the location. So you don't have full control of when you're snapping with the snapping style. Next up, we have the Omae More Shinderu, or like you're already dead snap. So this is basically a turn 4, turn 5 snapper where he sees the game and he's like, well, I do this, I do this, I do this, I never lose. So you've already lost. I'm snapping, like that kind of thought process. So it's pretty good. It's a safe snapping strategy. However, it's pretty late in the game. Good players will identify the game state and they'll leave. So against good players, this doesn't really work because you say you're already dead, and they say, I know, I'm leaving. You know what I mean? So against good players, you kind of have to do it earlier. But it is a very safe, very predictable game. It is a safe game style, but it is also predictable. So that's why it's in con, because you snap like, okay, I have the win, and then they're like, okay, well, he snapped here because he has this and this and this. So if their hand can actually deal with this and this and this, you can actually turn that situation around and get lose some cubes. So it is normally a very strong strapping style, but like against good players, this can backfire a little bit. All right, next up, we've got the Daredevil Snap. This MF here. So this snapping style, you snap with a Daredevil on your board into turn 5 after they do their play. And I hate this one. Personally, this one annoys me because it's like, well, they have the answer, like probably. A lot of times, you don't even need the answer. You don't need to be winning the game. You don't have to do anything. It's like, well, he saw my play and he snapped. I guess he has it, so I leave. So this is extreme mental pressure. You really have to be very confident about your position to stay in. The problem with this is you usually only get 1 cube because, you're playing the game out normally, and then like turn 2, you play Daredevil, so they know, oh, he has a Daredevil. Okay, I'm not gonna snap, right? So it's hard to get people to be super confident when you already have a Daredevil on the board. And then turn 5, you have to snap, because if you snap earlier, then it doesn't matter. So you have to snap on that specific window, and then they just leave. So you're usually only getting 1 cube. And then also, like, if the player is really good, they know like he's snapping here, but he still can't beat me. You're losing 8 cubes or 4 cubes, so you have to be very careful. And then you also can't snap earlier, right? So if you snap earlier than turn 5, you don't have that pressure of like, I saw your play and I'm gonna counter it. So that's kind of the issue with it, but it's still a pretty powerful tool to get guaranteed 1 cubes whenever you get Daredevil on 2. So still like it. Next up, we have the full calculation snap, right? So this is the upgraded Shinderu snap where you do all the math basically, and you've predicted the whole game, very high level stuff. And the real benefit, the why it's like a little bit better, is you can do this on turn 3, right? Like if you can figure out, oh, he's playing this archetype with this deck list in this meta against my hand here, turn 3, I'm gonna play this. He can't win from this position. Snap, like that's so strong. However, problem with this is you have to use your brain, and I think that's a con. And it requires mastery of the meta or false confidence, like pretend mastery, like, oh, I probably win here. And also taking too long can alert your opponent. So sometimes you don't always do this on 3, right? Sometimes turn 4, you wait until like the end of the turn, and then you snap turn 4. Like, okay, well, he thought the whole game through. I'm leaving. So the best way of utilizing this is being able to do all the calculations very quickly and then snapping. So can be hard. So it is maybe the best strategy, but it's the hardest to do, and the most likely you won't be in the situation to take advantage of this snapping style most games. So yeah. And next one, we've got the taking too long snap. So this is like, okay, this guy, it's turn 3 and he's like taking forever. He doesn't have Zabu then. I'm snapping. Like, that kind of thing. Where normally the turn is obvious. It's turn 2. Like, why are you taking forever? He must not have anything good. Let me snap and pressure him. So this can be really strong because you can pressure your opponents to leaving, because sometimes you're like, oh man, I hit nothing. There's nothing there. What do I do? None of my plays are good. He snapped. Okay, I'm leaving. That kind of thought process can occur. And usually you're snapping here because your play is obvious, it's very good, and their play is not, and they're trying to think it through. So you're usually snapping in a good situation for yourself, in a good position. Some of the cons is just because someone's taking a long time doesn't mean that they're behind, doesn't mean that they're struggling. And sometimes they could just be AFK. They could also like they went to the restroom or blah, blah, blah. So it doesn't always mean that they're taking too long because they're thinking, or because they're behind, or because of poor game state. So you do have to be careful. And that is the video. I hope some of these resonated with you, and I hope you enjoyed it. And I will say at the end that you want to be using multiple styles. Like I say which are you, but most people are going to be more than one of these, right? Most people are going to be like, oh, I'm a little bit of this today, I'm a little bit of that yesterday, I'm a little bit of this. I definitely am a lot of these snapping styles, and it depends on my deck and my how I feel, and how much effort I want to put into into it. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope you learned something, and we'll see you in the next one.